Good morning, everyone. Okay, so identity, passion, and purpose. These are three things that will often get lost during military transition or retirement after you leave active duty. It's one of the common things I hear from military spouses. I don't know what my identity is. I don't feel passion for anything. I don't have a purpose anymore. So when you're active duty, you just kind of start dreaming of that day where you finally have time to do it all. Nobody's telling you where to go. Nobody's telling you if you can take a vacation. All of a sudden, everything's going to be happening for you at that time. But when you finally transition and find yourself in the civilian world, it's really not as simple as you thought it might be, or straightforward for that matter. Your identity turned into a drifter and hopped a train to somewhere, your passion packed up and it moved on without you. Your purpose is hiding under the bed, too afraid to come out. My guest today, Brittany, is the founder of Discovering Your Spark. You may have heard of the program or Brittany herself. She's been featured by the USO for all the amazing work that she's done to support military spouses in this area, both active duty and retired. So today we get sort of a mini course on how you can find out who you are and then live who you are with purpose. Thank you so much for joining me today. Just to introduce myself, I'm Anna Larson. I am your SpouseLink ambassador, and this is a SpouseLink live stream. I am also a copywriter, a digital marketer, and a homeschool mom, and a retired military spouse. These live streams are for other military spouses who are looking to connect and support, looking for connection or support as they near a crossover into transition and retirement from active duty military world. So SpouseLink was created in 2012 by AFMA, which is the American Armed Forces Mutual Aid Association, to support, inform, and inspire military spouses around the world. As we dive into today's topic, I would love to have you leave comments, share your experiences, let us know where you're joining from, all the different things. Not only do I value what you have to say about this topic, but we love that interaction with our guests and community. So please drop who you are and what you're doing down in the comments so that we can get to know you a little bit better. I am going to pull up Brittany's bio so that we can get started and I can tell you who she is and I can bring her up here and we can have a conversation. So Brittany is a proud mom and wife. Wait, let me redo that. A proud wife and mom of two. She's a community connector, so true. Recovering perfectionist who loves sweet tea and a good paper planner. She has managed to maintain a career, be an active and supportive stay-at-home parent through remote work, and an advocate for military and veteran families. In 2017, she received the honor of being named the Armed Forces Insurance Military Spouse of the Year, which we just found out who the new one is yesterday. So congratulations, Brittany. That's amazing. She used the opportunity to travel the country, investing in all military spouses by helping them define their identity and purpose. Her passion for helping others reclaim who they are and finding new purpose has resulted in her developing the Discovering Your Spark brand, which provides self-growth and professional development workshops. Brittany is a community leader, an entrepreneur, and a military community engagement consultant who has been involved in community leadership since 2005. Over the course of her career, she has presented, advised, and shared ideas with community leaders throughout the nation. So I'm very excited to welcome Brittany. Let me pull this down and bring her up.
Hi.
Hi. I'm so excited you're here today.
I'm really excited to do this.
I'm really excited to do this. So little do people know that in 2018, when I first came to Fort Hood, I took your class through the USO here on Post.
And that was like the first year I did them live. Like, so you were like the very beginning class that I did these workshops with.
Which I love. I have to just pull this up and add it. Look, that's me. I still have my workbook. Look, it's right here. I've kept it this long, which not because I'm a hoarder, okay, but because I found so much value in what I did that day. And I think that anyone who's taken your class probably has had that very same experience.
It's been very interesting because the ideas and concepts that are inside the book And when I wrote them, nothing is like new or like cutting edge or anything. It's simply topics and questions that no one's asking us and
Yeah.
that we've stopped asking ourselves. And so it's like that reminder to say, hey, like, what do you really want to do? Or what do you really enjoy doing? How do you want to spend your time? Like all of these things that the monotony of life and life moments get in the way. And before we know it, we're like, it's 8 o'clock and we're putting the kids to bed, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
and you're like, what do you mean? I had time for myself today? Like, so the workbook is, it's amazing how it has really impacted the lives of military spouses. It's evolved to helping the transitioning spouse, the caregiver spouse.
Yes.
It's helped now even active duty service members who are transitioning out, like answer these questions and go back and think, why did I, number one, come into the military?
Yep.
And like, did I do the job I wanted, or did I do the job that was available and given to me? And 20 years later, I've just been doing that same job. Like, and to get to a point now to where they're retiring or separating from the military and saying, you mean I finally get to do what I want, like what I enjoy, you know? And so it's been unique to see it evolve and grow.
Yeah. So I love that you've transitioned, not transitioned really, but just continue to add to what the Discovering Your Spark brand does. So in 2018, when I took your first class, it was for military spouses. And I believe pretty much active duty
Yes.
military spouses is what you
Mhm.
focused on. And now
100%.
yeah, and now you've expanded that. And if I understand, you do a monthly thing with the USO. Does that sound right?
Yes, I actually so kind of funny behind it is that the workbook when I first built it, I guess I got to go back just a little bit and tell you here. When I first created the workbook, it was really after my year of winning the Armed Forces Insurance Military Spouse of the Year. It was my give back. So it was kind of like, I'm going to write this. For that whole year, I traveled around the nation with our senior military leaders. I was able to sit in rooms with military spouses of, officer enlisted, military spouses who were in very like metropolitan area and others that were in like more remote environments that they were living. And I kept hearing the same things. Like I just kept hearing it. It didn't matter like where they were. It was just, I was hearing the same thing from military spouses. And so I journaled all of that content for a year
Mm,
during my award year. And the workbook was like my give back to the spouse community. When I first wrote it, it was like, I don't want to hear military spouses say these things anymore. I don't want to hear a military spouse say, it'll be my turn when they retire or when they separate. I'm like, your time now. Like, you too. It's not you first, it's you also. Like, let's, figure it out. And
yeah.
so it was my give back. And that's how it really started. And most people don't understand that I actually had to present the content at the Pentagon to spouses of our senior leaders and combatant commanders. And talk about intense.
Yeah,
Like,
I can imagine.
I'm an enlisted spouse going into a room, and I worked these spouses through the workbook so that they could understand. And the amazing thing is that the rank, there was no different. It didn't transcend. Like, the spouses there were also experiencing
Yeah.
some of the same things that the spouses that I had met in Altus, Oklahoma and, DC and all over were experiencing. And they were like, this is needed. Like, we need this. And so that's really how it started. And then it just evolved. So Find Your Color in a Camouflage World was the first installment, like the first workbook. And the name of it was, to me, it was very fitting because we live in this camouflage military life. And it was like, where do you fit in? Like, where do you belong in that? What's your color in that? And then it's now evolved to where we still have that workbook. Like, I'm still operating off of that. It's been revised multiple times. And then we've expanded to Continuing Your Journey, which then provides 12 modules of additional content to really help the self-growth and development for military spouses, but also the transitioning. I'm a retired spouse now,
Yeah,
and
you
woo,
know.
I get it, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Um, and
Okay.
almost even more challenging, I feel like.
Well, I love that you've done this, because I think that this is one of those things where we spend so much time supporting our service member that you're right. We as military spouses get lost in that shuffle
Mhm.
on the day to day, and we don't necessarily recognize that. We think we're doing what we think we're doing all the things we're supposed to do, we want to do. There might be a few things here or there we're like, oh, I don't have time for that. But
Mhm.
we find purpose with being that military spouse that becomes our identity, right?
It does. It does. And I think one of the biggest moments or pieces of reflection I have received from writing this book and then getting it out there in front of spouses and getting feedback is that um, I've learned that we have a giving community and we have organizations that want to serve our community and they want to provide programs and services. But what I've learned is that all of this has been provided to us without a lot of the organizations and services actually knowing what we need. And my best feedback is I had worked with a group of spouses, and we were kind of working more on a professional side, like career focused profession on like finding your place, like what are you going to do? And at the end of the class, after 2 hours, what I realized is that majority of the spouses in the room did not actually want a career. That's not what they wanted at that time. What they wanted was to feel value in what they were choosing to do. And
Mm.
the only way they felt they were going to get that value was through employment and a dollar figure associated with it. And that was like this big wake up call for me because I was like, we have to normalize valuing the military spouse who's choosing to stay home, who's choosing to be available for their family, who's choosing to be able to pick up with no notice and make sure the household is good, the kids are good, the family's good. You know, think about owning a home and just taking care of the home, making sure everything is still handled. And there's something to say about that.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like if that is the choice you make, instead of like kind of the society around us being like, do more, be more, you know, go after that job. And you're like, but I'm kind of happy right here if everyone else could just value me in this spot
Yeah.
where I'm at. And so that was like this big moment for me doing this.
So if you had to sum it up, like if I had to say, Brittany, what is the meaning behind the words discover your spark, your program? Like, if you had to sum it up kind of in one sentence, like, what does this mean for a military spouse?
So I'm going to piece together a couple of my things here. So number one, I ask every spouse that comes through my program, how do you know when you get there if you don't know where you're going? So you got to know where you're going. So the discovering your spark is that finding out where are you going? And then behind that, why? Why are you going there? Why are you doing that? Why do you want to do that? And so it's the figuring out piece, it's recognizing the why, and then accepting and understanding that it may simply look different for you as a military spouse or a veteran spouse. It just might look different. So I like to use the example of myself. Like I just so desperately career wise always thought that I would be the executive director of a nonprofit. Like that was just what I was going to be made to do. Everything that I loved revolved around that. My education set me up for that. And then, you fast forward 20 years of a military spouse career. And I would tell myself over the time, well, you're not working for a nonprofit. You're not an executive director of a nonprofit. And then it was like the light switch went off and was like, well, why do I really want to do that anyways? And what are all the other things that I could be doing to fulfill that why? And once I changed the mindset piece and realized it looks different, I mean, look at me today. I'm still not the executive director of a nonprofit, but I have a program that is, licensed to a very large nonprofit, to the USO. And so it just looks different. And I had to really come to terms with that. And so
Oh,
that's what this does.
I love that. What you're saying is it reframes
Yeah.
where you thought you were going to be at this stage in your life. Because sometimes that can feel like a huge letdown, especially for a transitioning spouse, right? Because you're
Yeah.
doing it when you enter the military for the first time or you start living that life. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And then you figure it out and you get this rhythm going and you do it for however many years you do it, whether it be 4 years, 6 years, or 25 years, whatever that looks like, right? And now you're facing the exact same thing. Now you're going to be leaving the military. So let's talk for just a minute about identity and purpose.
Yes.
So I remember when I'm gonna pull this up. This is kind of the question, but I remember when I took your class, one of the things that you had us do is you said, "How do you introduce yourself? Like, how is that what identity do you give yourself when you're telling other people who you are? I'm a mother of, two. I'm the wife of this service member. I'm a small business owner. I'm a SpouseLink ambassador, right? You're an amazing workshop creator." But you said, let's really dig down into the who you really are kind of comments.
Yes. It's
Yeah.
so what's fun about that is that is something that I do in the workshops where I actually have spouses like introduce themselves so that I can see how they're going to introduce themselves. And I mean, I'm guilty of it for so many years. I would go to events on base and I would introduce myself as Adam's wife. Or if I was doing something in the community, I was Harper's mom. And I just, you have those epiphany moments where you're like, okay, I have a given name, right? Like my name's
Yes.
Brittany. How about we start there? And then I can go to whatever else, like, oh, and I'm Adam's wife, but identity is so challenging
Yeah.
because most of us identify through the roles that we play or the jobs that we have. And that's like kind of where we place our identity, and we say the things like I'm so and so's wife or so and so's mom. And I had that moment where I realized that I was introducing myself in that manner, and then I became more aware of the people around me and understanding like other people were introducing themselves that way. And so I learned that it takes a lot of intentionality to state like, hi, I'm Brittany, and then leave all the other identifiers out of the introduction and
And
just
just be okay with that
be
one.
okay with that. Yes. But just owning that I'm Brittany and then thinking to myself, well, who's Brittany? Like, who is Brittany when she's no longer a military spouse?
Mm.
And who is Brittany when she's no longer the director of military in her day job or any other job title? So it takes that self reflection and a lot of honesty with yourself to truly sit and determine, like, who are you? And this can be challenging for a transitioning spouse.
Mhm.
And I want to add in that it can be exceptionally challenging when you have a service member who's going through transition and they also don't know their identity. And you have two now in the household,
Boy, did you just hit on like a huge one, right?
right? I mean,
Because
it
what
is,
is our job normally? It's to support the service member to get done
yes.
what they need to get done first. So once again, you're putting yourself on hold for the most part
Hmm.
to support them in finding their new role, purpose, and identity
Hmm.
as a retiree,
Yeah. So you
veteran.
think about the recipe for disaster when transition happens, right?
Yeah.
And we have a service member who's trying to find out who they are, what they're doing, why they're doing it, what their future is, where their purpose is. And I think there's statistical data out there that says veterans, it's like 5 to 7 jobs until they figure out what job they're going to have after they get out of the military. Like
Yeah.
that's a kind of an average. And so you think about that, and then you think about the military spouse. And if the military spouse is also saying, I don't know who's now a veteran spouse, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I want to do. I don't know who I am. Like, where do I fit in? Where do I fit in this new community we're living in? Like, it is a recipe for disaster in your home. And so that's why it was so important for me to start with the military spouse, to like really lay that foundation, get the military spouse while active duty to like figure out what they want and be prepared so that there's a little more stability in the transition process. Now, that doesn't always happen. And we do get into the fact where we have a military spouse trying to figure out what they're doing. And it's possible. I mean, it's possible to happen, and you can make it as a couple through it, but it's challenging, right? I mean, there's no, let's not sugarcoat it. It's going to be challenging, but you know, my spouse has been retired for 3 years now, and it is very hard for me to believe that. And I think it took almost 2 years to change the verbiage of me saying I'm a military spouse to saying I'm a veteran spouse. Like, giving my ID card over to get a retiree ID card, that was very hard. Like, so there was these own things that I was having to go through emotionally with my identity, you know? And then of course I'm like, well, once a military spouse, always a military spouse, right? You know, once you were once a Marine, always a Marine. That's the whole saying.
Right.
But it is challenging. Like, I'll find myself now and I'll be like, oh, I'm a retiree spouse, or I'm a veteran spouse. You know, I was a military spouse for this long. And so changing that verbiage is like, it's a tiny, big change.
Yes.
For a transitioning spouse.
It is a tiny big change, but it's an important one because we're just at 2 years and I still struggle with the veteran retire. I mean, I just today introduced myself as the retired military spouse. I didn't retire from being a military spouse. I mean, that's like the most wrong thing. I guess I'm going to have to change the verbiage in that now that I start to like think about it. But because my identity is so strongly tied to my time as the spouse of an active duty service member, it's a huge part of who I am, and even why I am where I am, and even why I'm doing something like this live stream, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to negate it. Like, okay, so so we've got some comments coming in. I just want to thank everyone for joining us. Yes, the identity shift. Jamie, it's coming. It's rough. Some days it's rougher than others. And just want to thank Ruth for joining us as well. But
I'm going to tell you a funny. So I was in Kansas doing a Discovering Your Spark workshop right before my spouse retired, like literally like 10 days before he officially retired. And our base had said, let's go ahead and get your ID card changed to a retiree card. Let's go ahead and do it. And I said, okay. And I didn't think to tell them that I was going to be traveling to another installation. And so when I tried to gain access to the installation in Kansas, they flagged me. They confiscated my card.
Oh no.
My ID card. And I'm like, you can't do this. This is my lifeline. I'm traveling. This is how I get on my airline. This is my medical card. Like, this is everything. And I remember being in a panic, calling my spouse, being like, they took it away. They won't let me on base. I'm having to get a sponsor to get me on base. Like, this has been like, no, 20 years. What are you talking about? I can't get on base. And it was a glitch in the system because they had already assigned me this card, but I just didn't know what to do with myself in that moment.
I actually can very strongly relate to this because I was unable to get we retired during COVID, so I was unable to get an appointment for more than 4 months after my spouse retired. And I was up in arms about it. I was angry about it because I said, I can't go on post without a new ID card. I mean, I could go to the visitor center, right? But guess what I can't do? I can't go to a doctor. or I can't pick up my medication because my ID card is no longer valid. I mean, it really has a huge ramification. That little card is your piece of identity, right? It's part of what it is. So, okay, so during your camouflaging, I find your color in a camouflage world. I want to get the
Uh-huh.
name. During your workshop, one of the things you had us do, this is going to be our first action item because I kind of promised a mini course, right? So
Uh-huh.
I want everyone to look and see when and how Brittany is doing these for real, because I truly believe this is something that would be so great for every transitioning military spouse to just spend the time to take some part of your discovering your Spark brand
Mhm.
workshops. Okay. But one of the things you had us do is you had us write how we defined ourselves. And then we had to hand it to a friend next to us and say, how do you define me? And this is what was written. I didn't take a screenshot because it was super messy handwriting. I just created it like this. But this is what came out of my book. This is what's in my book. So here's how I defined who I was as a person when I dug past Bella's mom and John's wife and all of those other identifiers that I use when I'm introducing myself,
Mhm.
and dug down to kind of the who I truly am. And then next to me, my bestie Selena wrote these things, and some of them cross over, but some of them surprised. And we had a really good conversation afterwards about what she saw versus how I see myself.
Mhm.
Just one in particular that I would I find myself to be very impatient sometimes with some things. Like I'm like, this is ridiculous. Just get it together, people, right?
Uh-huh.
Selena sees me as a social justice fighter. She's like, you don't tolerate, you have no tolerance for people that are not being fair or logical or practical or providing like that fair experience across the board. And so it was such an eye-opening thing for me. So this is the first, I'm going to move here. This is your first
Yeah.
action item for everyone listening. So how would they go about doing something like this?
So this is okay. So this is part of that self-reflection process that's so important. So it's time to be true for you. Grab a piece of paper, and grab a mirror or your cell phone and turn your cell phone around into selfie mode and look at yourself. And I challenge you to do this because I want you to look in the mirror or a reflection of yourself and say, like, how do I see myself? How do I see myself today? And all the things, like, do you see yourself as kind? Do you see yourself as overextended? Do you see yourself as exhausted, or do you see yourself well rested? Like, how do you see yourself and how do you define who you are? And it's important for us to like start to write those down. And the reason writing them down is very important is because once you write them and then you see them on paper, it's not like you can make them go away. Like you wrote it, it's there. It wasn't just this thought, it wasn't something um that you were just in the mindless of the day that it came across. It's like something you actually put down on paper. And then challenging you to ask somebody else how they see you really helps you to get a full picture of who you are, because as people, and I think as women especially, we're exceptionally hard on ourselves, and we will define ourselves and we will describe ourselves and point out every flaw, whether that is a emotional, mental, physical flaw. We'll point it out, and those are the things that we see in ourselves. Those are the things that we focus on. Whereas we have our friend next to us who is like, no, I see you have so much strength and I see you have so much courage. And I just don't know how you keep pushing through here. And then we might see ourselves as someone who's like, I'm failing. Like, I am just failing every day. And so this gives you this first actionable step to be able to identify how you see yourself and take into consideration how other people view you, and then put it together to create a true kind of package of who you are, how you're seen, and how you define yourself.
Yes. And it's not all positive, right? Like I always wanted to be known as smoky and mysterious. I'm sorry. I am one of the most practical, logical people around. There's nothing smoky and mysterious about me. Okay. Unless I'm like at a campfire, then maybe, right? But my true person and coming to realization of that part of who I am is super helpful, especially as we're starting that transition process, because I'm not putting unrealistic expectations on myself.
Yeah.
I need to be this certain kind of person. Instead, I can say, this is who I am. How do I take who I am into becoming the best next version, I guess? Would
Uh-huh.
you say next version of me?
It's all 100%. And I would also encourage people, which I don't, this is not part of my workshop, but it is something that some friends that I work with do, is identifying your strengths. Gallup Strength Finder is a great program.
Yeah.
Identifying your strengths and learning how to leverage those strengths in these like transitions, I think is highly critical for relationships. I think it's not just with your spouse, but relationship with kids, friends, employers, like all aspects of your life, to see those strengths and leverage them, and to really have that validation is critical. So you might, see like on mine, part of my identity is going to be strategic. I'm very organized. I'm very strategic, type A personality. Well, I probably look at myself with the type A personality and think of it negative. Someone else can look at it and say, you can just strategically put something together. Like, we know if you're organizing something, like it's going to be taken care of.
Yes.
But then how do I take that strength of organization or that strength of strategy and like make it useful in different categories and areas of life? So
Yeah.
just being able to leverage those things within your identity.
Yeah, leaning into those strengths. Thank you, Jamie. That's exactly. I mean, again, if I went back to that list that I shared earlier, I called myself frugal, right? Because I grew up in a very like a large family,
Mhm.
and we were careful with money, and we resourced a lot of stuff.
Like economic resourcefulness.
Yeah, and well, and Selena called it resourcefulness, and
Mhm.
she did not grow up the same way I did. And so in my head, I saw it as a negative, right? I have a
Uh-huh.
hard time spending money just randomly. Where she's like, "You're so resourceful. I wish I could do some of these things you
Yeah.
do," right? And I think this is the real benefit. So, okay, everyone, I'm just gonna throw this up there one more time. If you're listening or catching the replay, this is your
Yeah.
first action item. And I did not do this with a in front of a camera or with my cell phone turned on me, but maybe I'll have to do it again, right? Because I think that adds a new element of like discomfort almost, to be
It
honest.
does. You and getting into that raw situation of being honest with yourself, like looking yourself in the mirror and being like, do you want to lie to yourself?
Yeah.
No. Like, and if you can't sit and be honest with yourself, then it's going to be very hard for you to be honest with the people around you, the relationships you have, your spouse, your kids, whoever it may be. And so it's just that opportunity to be very vulnerable, to peel back the layers. No one else needs to see it. This is just for you.
Yes.
And this is developing your baseline. And if you come to any of my workshops, that is like my keyword that I probably say 15 times easy is baseline. Because again, if I go back to how do you know when you get there if you don't know where you're going? Well, how would you know how far you improve and how successful you are or what you achieve if you don't know where you came from? Where's your baseline? Where did you
Yeah.
start? And then to be able to see growth 6 months from now, 12 months from now. So it's really critical to do the self reflection to get a baseline.
Yes. Negatives into positives, gaps in capability into opportunities for
This,
growth.
John, we should be best friends because one of my other taglines in my class is we're going to take a can't and make it a can. Like, and in my house, I tell my kids all the time when I hear them say, like, I can't, and I'm like, yeah, can't never could do anything. Can't never could. Like, you're right, 100%, you know?
Yeah, I love that. We use a similar one. His name is Mr. Nobody. Who did that? Nobody.
Mhm.
Oh, really? Mr.
Yeah,
Nobody came to visit, did he?
Mr. Nobody. I like that. I
Yeah.
like that.
Okay, this has been so good. All right, we're going to move on to phase two, which isn't really phase two. It's all kind of like morphs into one thing after another. But okay, so the second kind of module that we went through when I took your workshop, and again, this is her very first year of putting this on, so things have changed. But I'm going to say, not so much that this isn't going to be kind of fall in line. And again, go take one of her real classes. Okay. This is just a mini course. It gives you a taste. But all right, you were talking about baseline, which flows beautifully into the next thing, which is going back to basics. Okay. So I felt like this really tied into your identity and purpose piece because you're finding your core values of who you are kind of as a human being, as opposed to your role that you play in life.
Yes.
And one of the questions that you asked us was, what did you always dream of becoming? Okay, I can tell you right now, at the age of 7, I never said a military spouse.
Right?
That was never on my list, first of all. I actually said truck driver because I wanted to travel the world, and I came from a very small town, and apparently air flight wasn't.
What? You've traveled all over the world, not as a truck driver, but the reasons behind that, I'm pretty sure I could discover your spark through it and be like, it looks different, Anna. It just looks different.
Look at you reframing right now my 7-year-old dream of being a truck driver, right?
Yeah, you fulfilled that. You have fulfilled that why.
So what's funny is like this whole next part is kind of about when we're a military spouse, we put our dreams on hold. What you're saying to me right now, which just was a huge light bulb aha moment, is I didn't really put that dream on hold. I fulfilled it in a different way.
It's a different way. That's why I really focus on like these keywords. And my thing is like, it's just going to look different. It just might look different. And it's really reframing the way of thinking. That's all it is. It's reframing the mindset, the power in positive thinking, and getting rid of the negative self-talk and saying, well, I wanted to be a truck driver, but that didn't happen because of military life. And I'm like, but really, maybe you weren't driving the truck, but have you driven a U-Haul? Have you done a Diddy move? How many times have you been across the United States or Oconus? So if we really broke down the dream, which is what this whole segment, this action is, it's taking the idea of the dream, breaking it down and saying, why this dream? Why truck driver? Why nurse? Why teacher? Why whatever it is? Why do you want to do that? And then it's really making a list of the why and then going through that list and saying, well, how else can I feel this way? How else can I achieve this? How else can I experience this? And then you start thinking about all of those and you get to a point to where you're like, oh, well, the whole reason I wanted to be a truck driver was because I wanted to see the world and I wanted to do blah, blah, all these things and be like, I've done that. I mean, it looks really different than what I imagined at 7, but I've done that. It just looks different for me. And I think that's, we have to be flexible as military spouses. I feel like we're flexible as veteran spouses. And sometimes it's as simple as that life is just going to look a little bit different for us than what we expected it to be. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's what I try in this, when we talk about the dreams, that's what I'm trying to get at. That's what I'm trying to get a military spouse or a veteran spouse to see, is that this lifestyle, it is not the preventative factor of you doing what you want or experiencing in your life. Like, is it a challenge? 100%. I am not trying to say it's not. Is it a barrier sometimes? Absolutely. But what are you going to do with the challenge, with the barrier? What are you going to do with it? And that's really where we start peeling those layers back.
Oh, this is such good stuff. I feel like I'm getting not a therapy session, but like a workshop today. I'm like, oh, I'm going to go through, rewrite all these things now as a veteran spouse. Go back. I feel like I need to do this again for myself, because what I wanted to do as an active duty spouse 5 years ago is very different than where I am today.
100%. And this is something that this workbook is something that you can keep and at a different season of life do it again.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you think about it starting off when you're early on as military spouse, and maybe you have young children, and then you get into the empty nest part. Then you get into like we transition out of the military, and now we're veteran. But, and then there's so many things that come into play. Are you a family that became a veteran family that moved away from the base? Or are you still living by the base? Or did your spouse take a government GS job and you're still like living as if you're a active military family? Like there's so many things
Yeah.
um, to kind of put into play there.
Yeah. Okay, so let me throw up our second action item.
Okay.
And I really love, I mean, threw it up a little bit earlier while you were talking about it, but
Mhm.
it comes down to what do you dream about? But I think what you said, Brittany, is really important. It's not just what do you dream about, big picture dreams, but the why behind
Yeah.
that dream. And that's really what you're looking for. So if we use my example again of wanting to be a truck driver, the why was because I love travel. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to see the wildebeest in Africa that I saw. I wanted to dive oceans. I wanted to climb mountains. That was what I wanted at a very young age. I've been
Mhm.
able to do those things because I am a military spouse, not
Yeah.
because I was a truck driver, right?
Yeah.
That was just how my 7-year-old mind framed it. So if you're listening, your first action item was to write down your who you are, turn that camera on yourself, that mirror on yourself, dig deep into the who you are, not your titles. And then second here is going to be the whys behind your dreams. And how many of them have actually come true, just
Yeah.
not how you expected,
How
right?
you not how you expected them to come true.
I love that.
100%.
Yeah. So I keep throwing up the questions I'm going to ask you as tickers because you're answering them before I actually ask the
I'm
question.
sorry.
Yeah. No, don't be sorry. I love it. I'm just letting everyone know when this random question starts going across, it's because Brittany's talking about it right now. I don't need to like stop her and be like, wait, let me ask the question first.
Yeah.
All right. Let's take that off. Let's move on to kind of our final little, I guess, module, if you want to call it
Uh-huh.
that. So, or there's yeah. So one of the things I wrote in my book was give yourself your love language, and I thought that was a kind of a beautiful thought about not relying on others. And it was in the section where you're talking about motivations. Okay, motivations as a human being, and you ask some 4 questions. What motivates you to get up in the morning? What are you doing when you're at your best? Why do you love the relationships you have? And why do I admire who I admire?
Mhm.
So if we're looking at those questions, and I'm going to I wish I'd made a slide for those questions and I didn't, which is silly, but I'll throw them into the comments.
Okay.
What can answering, throw this up, look, it's a question. How can asking those questions about that motivation help us reach that next stage of transition, acceptance, joy, whatever it is that we're going for with that retiree transition kind of moment?
Yeah, these questions. So again, they're not these new out of left field questions. They're just things that we typically are not asked or don't ask ourselves. So when you think about what motivates you to get up in the morning, it can be as simple as it's a new day. Today's a new day, a new start, a new beginning. What happened yesterday is done. It can't be changed. But what is to come today is yours. Like it's for you. So you're not guaranteed tomorrow. So each wake up, and that's what we call it in our house. Like we're like, oh, it's 2 days and a wake up, right? Is a new opportunity. So figuring out what motivates you, it could be something totally different. It could be your kids motivate you. It could be you have somebody that you look up to and you admire. But whatever it is, it could be as simple as it's a new day, and that's what motivates you. What are you doing when you're at your best? So, if you want to know when you are at your best, ask the people around you. Ask
Mm,
your spouse, ask your kids, ask your family and your friends, and take note of what they say. And you will be able to paint a picture of what it is that you're doing when you're at your best. I mean, that is the best way to figure it out. Um, let's see. Why do you love the relationships you have? Okay. It's important to evaluate the relationship you have, determine if those are bringing you peace and joy, and if those or if they're bringing you heartache. Okay. And it's really important to do this because we as individuals need to establish boundaries in relationships. Um, but to answer like the question, you really need to ask yourself more questions. So to answer the original question, you need to ask yourself more questions like, how does this relationship make me feel? What does this relationship make me do? And that'll help you identify why you love the relationship you have. Okay. And then the last part of that was, why do I admire who I admire? Um, when you think of who you admire, it's typically because you relate to what that person stands for, their work ethic, their contributions, and their character, right? So you may admire your parents, you may admire a public figure, but that's typically why you admire someone. So I think that answers all four, like rapid fire.
Yeah. So if we're asking ourselves these questions, going back to the original thought, how is that going to help us through our transition in retirement? What is this going to do for us?
Well, because I think you have to, when you're transitioning out, if you say that the military motive is what motivated you or that lifestyle, that's going to be a hard transition, right? You've got to really figure out what is it that actually like motivates me. What is it that I'm doing when I'm at my best, so that you can continue to do those things and not get stuck on the like 1 foot back here, right? Like
Yeah.
you've got to be able to move forward, be working towards something, have goals that you have established to help with that transition. And so these kind of basic things are that, like what I would like to call like the transition step, is being able to say like, why are you motivated today? What is it? Who's making you motivated? Who are you admiring? How's this relationship you have? Because that relationship dynamic's going to change a whole bunch from
Says
active duty to transition. So what is it truly about the relationship that you liked, that you loved, and hold on to those pieces, because we can't hold on to the piece that is actually not there anymore, which is the military piece. So that's why these are really basic questions, but they just help us with that transition.
I love the way you explained that. It's almost like the dream thing that we were talking about, right? It's really the why behind each of these questions as opposed to the actual thing.
Yes.
And when that thing goes away, we have to find something that's going to help us fill that true why.
Yes.
Why we admire who we admire. What is it that they're actually doing? And can you find that in another way when active duty life is over?
Yeah, it's different, right?
Yeah.
But this whole process of this book and the question just really help you reframe all of it into what this next phase of life is.
Okay. So our next little thing and our final action item really talks, well, I didn't know how much of an impact taking your class 5 years ago was really going to truly have. I mean, I certainly did not think then 5 years from now, I'm going to be talking to Brittany on a, live stream for transitioning and retiring spouses. That wasn't even in my transition to retirement, wasn't even my thought process 5 years ago.
It wasn't mine either.
Right? So big shocker there. That's the first one. But one of the things that when I went back through this workbook, one of the things I'd like circled and read and like really highlighted was this phrase that you said, stop living for the military because they are not living for you. And I was like, wow, that is like a powerful statement, because so much of what I did, I wouldn't say it was for the military per se, but it was for my spouse who's in the military to make him successful in that sense. But it all relied on my acceptance of the military valuing me and the role I played, right? And this goes almost back to the number one thing that we talked about. And how do we value ourselves, right? So if you have these spouses now that are struggling with the fear of the unknown, the military is going away in the sense of active duty service.
Yeah.
even if they can't vocalize it or fully recognize it, there's this anxiety that comes when you realize that your entire world is going to be shifting. Things are going away, everything's changing. So when they're letting go and stopping, not living anymore for the military, what does that mean? How does it make that transition process easier?
So I'm going to be so honest that this has been the hardest thing for me to accept. And I've had to put a lot of work and a lot of intentionality with it, because for so many years, our family lived for the military. I mean, we planned vacations, getting to see people, you know, our marriage, our wedding, we had to postpone 3 times because of TDYs and deployments. And we lived for the military. And I realized that the military was not living like it, they're not living for us. You know, it's a big business, basically.
Yeah.
Is what it is. So the best advice that I could give you: fear of the unknown. It's a real thing, and it's a real thing first. And there should just be a period at the end of it. Fear of the unknown is a real thing. Period. But the best advice that I can give you is, when you're making this transition and going from so much of your life living for the military and all the nuances of the military, is to print out a life wheel. Okay. You can go to Google, you can type life wheel. That's WHEEL. I know I have a Southern accent. Sometimes that comes off, but you print out this life wheel, and it asks you about 8 categories of your life, and you grade those categories of life, and you start a vision board. So you take this, you grade those categories, start a vision board, and the vision board should be about you, your life, your family, your dreams, your desires. And that's where you start your new transition. And
Mhm.
you look at it and you say, you know, I need to focus on health and wellness. I haven't done that. We need to, as a family, focus on relationships with our family, because we've been absent for 20 years. We want to do more. We want to see our siblings. We want to see our nieces and nephews. We want to have those moments with grandparents. Like, whatever it is on that life wheel, it'll give you this newfound kind of, reinvigorize you and be like, okay, I have something new to work towards. Like, this is my life. And the military was a big piece of it. But now I have all of this. And there's no one telling me that we can't go and we're going to miss. Like, we get to do this now.
Yeah.
And really let that excite you. Let that kind of build up the motivation and be something for you to work towards. But it's great to have this template, because it's not just like your mind being like, what now? What next? What do I
Yeah.
do? Because then you just race, right? It's just racing thoughts. This way keeps you in line. It gives you 8 categories. Start there. Take your vision board. And then the rest is, it's up to you. It's your
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yay. I love that. It's like such the perfect ending, right?
Yeah.
So let me throw up our third action item. All right. So the first one was to turn a mirror on yourself and really look at who you are. And again, just to reiterate, I'm not talking about your identity, like your roles you play in the sense of I'm a mother, I'm a spouse, I'm this. It's the core human values that you find within yourself.
Uh-huh.
Um, your kindness, your intelligence, those kinds of things. That's the first action item. The second one then becomes to write down what your dreams are. What do you dream about doing now that you're no longer active duty? Uh, and then the key here was to stop and really think about the whys behind those dreams. What is it you're really looking to do? And if you scroll back, you can see that hilarious exchange about me wanting to be a truck driver and actually fulfilling my dream, because the real why was traveling the world. And guess what I did as a military spouse? I accomplished that dream. And now this third one, action time, build yourself a vision board of all of the possibilities and things that you have to look forward to, so that there is some joy and excitement in this transition, right? And it's not all dread and fear and sadness and like drama. and just where your life could potentially take you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. So, okay, so there's your third one. Build a vision board. All right. Brittany, this has been so good. I hope everyone loved this little mini course. Like, and again, I'm just going to say you need to take the full one if you possibly can. Jump on the ones the USO offers. They're free, they're virtual. You know, and just this could be such a good tool through the transition process to just take that moment that you need for yourself. I mean, this is one of the things I harp on, right? I didn't do that when we transitioned. It was all about my spouse, making sure he had everything he needed. I did not stop and say, what does Anna need during this moment? Like, it was, you know, it wasn't on my radar that I would need anything more than I already had, until the day he went on to post. No retirement ceremony, again, COVID, right? Until he went on to post to pick up his DD-214. And then I had a complete meltdown, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, I didn't expect it. It was, I didn't know it was going to happen, but it did happen. And I wish that at that time I'd had those tools that we've talked about today. So thank you so much, Brittany, for doing this for us today. Okay, I'm going to throw up where and how we can find you. Can you tell us where to find you real quick?
Yep. I'm on LinkedIn, Brittany Boccher. You can go to discoveringyourspark.com if you would like to email me. I answer all my emails. I don't have a virtual assistant, so you will actually get a response from me. And then on Facebook, you can reach me at Discovering Your Spark. I try to post as much content on there, recommendations, motivation, everything that I have, anything I have access to, I try to put on there. That's how
definitely. Yes, definitely go follow Brittany. Definitely do that. Okay, we're going to just jump in next week, or not next week. Next up is Annette Wittenberger with this wild ride called Life. Brittany, I want to go ahead and say thank you so much for being here with us today. And for anyone listening, follow Brittany, do all the things, go through your 3 action items, and tell me how it goes.
Yes,
and
please.
With that, we're going to say goodbye, and we will see you at the next SpouseLink live stream.
Thank you. Bye.